I'm gonna open STS. I'll choose another workspace that I have here. And please stop me if I'm going too fast, okay? So now we don't want to create we don't want to create servlets or anything like that. We want to create a Spring Boot project. So first of all, before I create a new Spring Boot project, let's go to the Spring framework so that we understand what it is. Okay, so the Spring framework is pretty much a bunch of technologies created by the Spring company. Okay, so Spring it's a framework created by Pivotal, and they have many projects. One of these projects is what we call Spring Boot. Okay, the most used current framework that for Java web developers. Okay, so they have many projects. They have the Spring framework itself. They have Cloud Data. They have Spring Security, which we use as well to protect our app. For example, we're making users log in and making sure they only have access to certain pages. But most of it, we use Spring Boot. Okay? Any questions about Spring in general? No? Cool. So we're going to use Spring Boot to create our first application. New, we want to choose Spring Starter project. Oh, that was the wrong one. And here, let's create a project. So actually, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna delete some of these. Delete. Okay. So new Spring Start project. What do you want to call this project? Let's call it first project. Okay, first project. Now we want to choose war as our packaging. Okay, so what the packaging means, at the end we're gonna zip this project to be able to deploy it, right? And there's two types of zipping methods for Java projects, jar and war. We use war because it's short for web archived. So it's a web app, so we choose the war option. Now group and package, they're the same. Okay, so these are just gonna make sure that everything is namespaced correctly. So first project, and the default package that I want is called first project as well, right? And reverse domain name, correct? And then here I'll write a short description, first project and Spring Boot. The artifact is the same name of the project name, and we don't have to touch this. So not a lot of changing that we have to do besides the group and the package. The artifact should be automatically updated, and we're good. All right. The next thing that I want to do is choose which dependencies I need. So whenever we create a Spring Boot project, we kind of say, hey, I need these tools. For example, this project is going to be a web project. Okay, this project is going to use a database like MySQL, right? This project is going to use an ORM called JPA. I'm not going to do those two right now. I'm just going to do DevTools. So DevTools here, and once you start using them, it will remember which ones you have used and put it up top here. That's why I have these up top. Now, these two DevTools, all it does is auto refresh. Do you guys remember when Django, every time you save, they auto refresh your app, right? So you don't have to keep restarting the server. Same thing here. DevTools is the tool that does that. Web, all we're seeing here makes a web project, right? Now we finish and let it create. Okay, let's just wait a little bit. If you look at the bottom right here, it is getting everything ready. Okay, it says 26%. So let's wait for it. I'll pause the recording. Now if I go to my first project, you see this laid out here. Okay, so let's walk through the file system here. Pom.xml, arguably the most important file of your project. Okay, so this project fills out the information of all the things that your project is and needs. For example, right here, right? No, sorry, not right here. Right here, we have the name of our project, right? We have the description, the things that we just filled out 2 seconds ago. In this dependencies tag, we have the actual dependencies of our project. So this is called XML, okay? And XML is just a file that it's very similar to HTML, but it's to deliver information, right? Where HTML is to structure web pages, XML, you send files to describe information or to give information. It's how JSON is today, right? This is what JSON used to be, or no. JSON is the equivalent of XML, but for nowadays.
New version.
Not new version. It's just another way to give information, but we used to do it with pure XML before JSON became the standard, right?
Is it going away, the XML?
No, not really. No. Yeah, it's still very heavily used. It's just for web, JSON is a lot easier because it comes in JavaScript, right, already. So in here, in this tab, you see this dependencies tab. Right here, if you need to add other dependencies, which you will, you have to click here and then search, right? But for today, we don't need to add any extra dependencies. Should we start a server? I'll take that as a yes. So I'll right click on the project name and I'll run as, now we want to run as a Spring Boot app. Okay. Once I run as a Spring Boot app, my server should start. Beautiful. My server is starting. Now, I'm just going to go to localhost 8080 and we get this. So, what error are we getting here? Huh? What? Yes, that's correct. But what specific error?
It has no mapping routing.
Ooh, good guess. That is correct. But what specific error is this telling us? If you read it, you'll be able to answer this question. No, that's correct. Not found. That's a 404, right? You guys know what a 404 is, right? File not found. Couldn't find the resource, right? But what does that mean? That means that at least I'm getting something back from a server. That means it's working, right? Because if I go to for example, a URL that does not exist in the world, right? I get this. I can't reach the server at all. There's no server behind this. Here, we're getting a 404, which means at least there's something listening to this request, but just because there's something listening to the request doesn't mean I have something to give back, right? I have not found what you're trying to do, right? Going to localhost 8080. Okay, so let's fix this. So in the platform, what I kind of decided to teach you guys first is by just writing code in this first project application file. So whenever you name your project, you're gonna have your whatever project name you created. So let's say demo or Ninja Gold application, right? Checkerboard application, right? Whenever you create a Springboard project. Now look at this guy. This is familiar, right? Entry point method. Every Java project needs an entry point method. So this is where your entry point method will live in. Now, you won't have to write anything in this file until deployment, okay? But for educational purposes, I kind of showed you guys real quick how it works. So I'm gonna use a annotation here called REST controller. Okay. So REST controller here, I import it, and what it says is that this class, this Java class, now becomes a controller, or if you guys remember for Python, it becomes a view, right? This is the guy that directs traffic, that gets the route and sends some information back, either JSON or a web page, or with data from the database and things like that. Does that make sense so far? So if I don't have this REST controller annotation, this class is just a regular Java class, nothing special. Okay. So if a user wants to go to the home route here, that's what type of request is it doing? Get, put, post, delete. It's a get request, right? So I'll use a request mapping annotation that goes to the home route, right? This by default makes a get request. Okay. Now, inside the request mapping, I'll have a function that returns a string, and I'll say home, and then I'm gonna say return you hit the home route. Okay, right here. Now I'm gonna back to slash, and hey, there we go. So we use annotations to first define controllers and to define routes. Okay? Questions? No? So let's not mess with this file here. Let's take this out. Okay? I want a controller to not to be in this file. I want a controller to be in its own file. So I'm gonna right click on the package and create a new package called .controllers. It's very, very, very important that your sub packages are inside of your main package, right? The main package is what you get by default. What we said in the beginning when we set up the application. The sub packages is everything that you create after the fact. So it's com.codingdojo.firstproject dot your sub package. Very, very important. They need to be named the same. Now, if you imagine if I have a controllers package, what other package will I might have? From Django. Do you guys remember Django? You guys had views. What else do you guys have?
Like 2 more.
Maybe a little higher than that. No. Maybe models. Right? You guys remember models? So we'll create a models package, right? So here I'll create controllers and new class. I'll say the home controller. Right now this is just a controller file. First thing that I'm gonna do is say, hey, this is a controller. Okay, a REST controller. So there's two types of controllers that I'm gonna introduce to you in the platform. There is the regular controller and there's the REST controller. Okay, the difference is between controller and REST controller. You use controller when you need to return a web page, which means .jsp file. Okay, that's when you use the add controller. You use the REST controller when you simply just need to return data. Okay, so pretty much JSON, right? If you're returning JSON or if you're returning a string, then you use a REST controller. For example, if I go to Star Wars API, okay, this route right here, right, that I go swap API, Star Wars API.co, this returns a web page, right? Like we can see, is a web page. Now this is to get this. I'll use a regular add controller annotation. Now, if I wanna use something like people/1 and see what I get from here. Right, this is JSON. Sorry, they still gave a web page here, but this is JSON, right? Right, what we see here. Okay, so they're sending back JSON. So whenever I want to send back JSON or just strings, for example, like how we did before, return welcome to the home page. We use a REST controller. Okay? So this is just a string. There's no H tags or anything like that, right? Eventually we want to get there, which we will. All right. Now let me show you guys here routing. I talk about routing, query parameters, and URL parameters. So here I talk about two things which are super important that we don't really cover anywhere else. We cover URL parameters, but we don't really cover query parameters. So I want to teach you guys about that. So whenever I go to google.com, for example, and I type in, what's the last thing that you search for, Ron, on Google? NBA games. Okay, I'm gonna search for NBA games. Now you look at the URL now, right? Oh, the URL doesn't get bigger. So whenever I search on Google, I'm making a request to www.google/search. That's the main URL. Now, everything after the question mark is what we call query parameters, key value pairs. Okay? So Q they just named the Q, but usually Q stands for query, which makes sense, right? When you make a search in Google, you query them. So Q equals to NBA plus game, and then plus OQ, maybe it's original Q, I don't know what it means, right? Is NBA plus games plus AQS, which maybe is the source of where this request is coming from, so they know it's Chrome, right? And source ID Chrome and IE equals UTF. So they are able to send information to the server via the URL, via query parameters. So we could do the same in any framework, right? But I'll show you guys how to do it here. So if you look at this right here, right? I'm gonna copy paste this code into our platform. So I want you guys to kind of take a deep look in this. So the first thing that we say at line 12, this class is a REST controller. So it's gonna respond to HTTP requests with just data, be a JSON or a string. Request mapping, what we say here. What does this mean? It's a routing. So it routes to the home route via a GET request. Okay, very important. This is a GET request by default. Okay. Next thing is the name of our method, which we should be okay with, right? And now we see something weird. So if I just had this right here, it'll look fine, right? It looks like any other method that we wrote before, right? In OOP or in any of the Java assignments that we've done. But now we need to, because this is a web framework, we need to kind of make it a little more special. So this variable search query is going to be the request param that comes as Q. So anything with a question mark, so I'm saying my home route, question mark, Q equals to something. Whatever something is being saved in the search query. Okay? So let's see if that works. So localhost 8080 / question mark, right? That's where, if you know, so let's make, or maybe we'll do it like this. Search. Okay. So I'm gonna say search question mark Q equals to JSON. You search for JSON, right? So you search for, and whatever that value is. So the Q is the left hand side, the search query is the right hand side. So if I change Q to whatever, right, then what do I have to change in my URL to still give me a correct answer? Q. This has to be called what now? Whatever, right? Left hand side, right hand side. And then I'll say Jenny. You search for Jenny. Now if I put Q back in, okay, and don't change the code here, then I get an error. Can you guys kind of find the error here? Bad request. It's telling me, okay, you gave me a request, but it's not in the format that I want. What is, and they kind of tell you here, right? The string parameter whatever is not present. I said in my method that I need something whatever to be the left hand side. But in my URL, I said that I don't have it. I'm gonna have Q. So if you look at the platform, here you could have something called a second argument, an optional argument that says, hey, I don't really need it. If you pass it in to me, then that's fine, I'll use it. If you don't, then I won't use it. Okay, require false. So if I put require false into my STS, now even if I search with Q, right, I get no, because obviously I'm still sending Q in. I don't have anything that's whatever, so search query is no, right? Got it? Questions? Sending information like this in the URL is a very, very common practice. Not everything is post for servers to understand. You could send GET requests as well, right? So below, right here, I have another example of how to send information to the server, which is via URL parameters. And this is something that you're more used to. For example, user/1, ideas/59, right? These are what we call URL parameters. So for example here, right, I kind of use the Coding Dojo model, right? learn.codingdojo.com/m/59/5655/37450. All this information here combined is what describes this web page, right? So if I copy this URL and go back here, it should take me to the same website, right? Because the combination of these numbers direct me exactly to this page, right? If I change this to something else, I don't even know if that will work. It's the very next one, or it's not. Interesting. It kind of skips. Huh. But does that make sense? Right? So in here, because that's part of the URL, we kind of had to say, hey, I have the URL here, right? That's the one that I'm expecting. So I'm going to copy paste here. And we make the URL, the things that we don't know what the user is going to pass, with the curly braces, right? Just like if it was a user ID, I'll say users/curly brace ID, right? Now we catch them via what we call path variables. So path variable track matches this track, path variable module matches this module, path variable lesson matches this lesson. I could call this anything I want. I could call this T, M, and L. Now, those path variables that are matched via these arguments are stored in these variables inside of my function. So here I call it tag, M, and L. Okay, now if I go back to my server and I paste that URL that we first kind of play with. Oh, but I want localhost, sorry. You see that we get those three things in here. Okay? Any questions? Are we good? Can I move on? Obviously, it will come better with practice, right? Now here, in this session right here, what you learned in the controllers and MVC preview section of the last Java on the web, this is where you apply. So how do I add JSTL and JSP for me to be able to use it, right? So you need to add these two dependencies, Tomcat Embedded Jasper and JSTL. So in the dependency section, I'll click add, I'll look for Jasper, and you can see here we have Tomcat Embedded Jasper, and then JSTL. And as soon as you do that, you're able to use the regular add controller annotation. So in my home controller, I'm going to say, hey, never mind, I don't want just data. I want to serve a HTML file, which is a JSP file, right? So we'll do that instead. Okay. And inside of my source down here, main web app, I'm gonna create a new folder called webinf. And here I'll create a new file, other JSP file called home.jsp. And here we have home.jsp. Now, I have added these little prefixes that you guys will need later. You guys will see it, these prefixes often. So by default, when you guys first create your JSP file, you won't have that. But you could go to settings, preferences, and go to web, JSP files, editor, templates, and these are all the default templates that you have for JSP files. So you want to go to the HTML5 one, and I just added those myself. So I just go to edit and I write how I want them to look like. So you could do the same. So every time it creates a JSP file, it follows this format. Okay? So here I have a JSP file, and I'm going to say hello world h1 hi everyone. Now in my home controller, I'm going to say whenever someone goes to the home route, public string home return home.jsp, right? Now, we kind of have to do another thing where we had to tell Spring where this home.jsp file is. It doesn't automatically know. So there's another file here called application.properties where you say spring.mvc.view.prefix equals to web inf. All this information is in the platform. So now we're saying the JSP file lives inside this webinf folder. So now when I run this, if I go to, where is it? Slash, I get the HTML page. And if you look at the source, it looks like an HTML page now, right? So those are the things that you need to do to set up your Spring project. Any questions? Yes, Shazay. WebINF is just a special folder that you need to create because everything needs to go through a route, through a controller. So you just create that folder. Web, I don't know what INF actually stands for. WebINF. I'm not sure. I could look into it later and give you an answer, but I'm not sure right now what INF stands for. Any other questions? Okay, then. I'll stop the recording now.